afternoon, good evening even. Welcome to Race to the Finish. Race to the Finish, if you have never joined us before, go back and check out the previous episodes. But Race to the Finish is a platform designed to build bridges of love from our heart to yours based on the Word of God, our own experiences, questions that are sent in from our guests and our panel. And really what we're doing is we're discussing social justice, social injustice, racial injustice in our world today. Because unfortunately, so many of these conversations, as I have said over and over again, are happening behind closed doors. Right now, doors are opening, people are coming out. Okay, but people are still having closed door backroom conversations regarding race. And so we have decided that we are going to be upfront. We're going to speak honestly, our truth, God's truth about race. And our prayer is to be able to build a bridge from our heart to yours about race. So let's talk about it, okay? We're going to go around. We have a beautiful panel here. We are going to have them introduce themselves. And I am going to start with Reverend Cheryl. Now, again, if you've never watched this before, okay, Race to the Finish. You need to go see the other ones. This is season 2. Reverend Cheryl, that's her first name. Okay, that's what's on her birth certificate, Reverend. Okay, that's it. All right, and her last name, well, I'll let her tell you. Go ahead, Reverend Cheryl.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cheryl Dorsey. Actually, my mom didn't call me a reverend. She called me many things, and reverend was not one of them. I am Associate Minister of Beacon Hill Missionary Baptist Church, and I'm prayer coordinator there. And I've served as prayer coordinator for Chicago Metro Baptist Association, which is the Southern Baptist denomination of some 200 churches of various languages and races, and it's just a beautiful thing. And I serve as prayer coordinator. I also serve on the board of the Rooftop USA, which is a prayer and evangelism ministry based on Acts chapter 10, and a couple other things. But I'm mom of 2, husband of 1, Rick Dorsey, and we've been married. We'll be 41 years in July. And he is an educator. He taught and preached at the same time. And so teaching is near and dear to his heart. He pastored at the school and he teaches at the church. So it all goes together. That's who I am.
Well, welcome, Reverend Cheryl, to the show. Let's start with, let's move over to Miss Sheila. Miss Sheila, tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
My name's Sheila Lewis. I am currently living in Nampa, Idaho. Husband's name is Brandon. We have 4 kids. 2 of them are out of the house now, so just the 2 living at home. And then I've been teaching since 2016. I teach 6th grade language arts at a middle school in Nampa, and I love it. And I love Jesus too. That'd be kind of important.
You know, that is important.
It is very
because
important.
Not every teacher loves Jesus. So thank you. Welcome to the show. Let's see, who else is on here? Miss Valerie, would you please introduce yourself, ma'am? Tell us a little bit about you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie Espinoza. I am the younger sister of Brother Noel and Sister DJ. So we're family. I am a current educator. I've been teaching for the past 10 years. I've worked with from pre-K all the way to 12th grade, elementary, middle, high school. I currently work with third through 8th grade students. I am what they call an academic support teacher. So my primary goal is helping students who are below grade level getting them back on grade level so that they are successful for their future. I've been married for almost 17 years. My husband, Roger, we will celebrate 17 years in July. We have 8 beautiful children, baby 9's on the way. So there's never a dull moment in our house except for when they're all sick. So we thank God for our life and what He's done for us, and everything we do is for Him. So that's Val in a nutshell.
Amen. Welcome to the show. Welcome. You and everyone, the whole family, welcome. And safe travel in Jesus' name. Did I get everyone?
No, you're missing.
No,
I'm missing someone?
You're missing someone.
Trish.
Miss Trisha. You know, I'm just joking. Go ahead, Trisha. Tell us a little bit about yourself, ma'am.
Well, my name is Trisha Jenkins, and I direct the traditional music programs at my church here in Tulsa. I play the piano and the organ, and I also direct the choir, although we've been on a bit of a break this last year with COVID, but we will sing again.
Amen.
And also being in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the week that we're recording this, I know we after the fact and is out, but this week that we're recording this, we're gearing up for the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. So that's what we're looking forward to lifting up over this weekend. So that's
wow, that's exciting. Welcome to the show, Trisha. So happy to have all of you here. Each one of your viewpoints matter, and I know you already know that. I just want to affirm that with you. I'm BJ, blood of Jesus. That's all you got to know. Would you?
And I'm Noel Perry.
Christmas, Christ. Well, I don't have anything. He's Noel. He's, this isn't about rhyming, okay? So, no, okay. Anyway, yes, this is my wonderful husband. As he has said, I've been married. We're newlyweds. We just got married last week, two weeks ago, last month.
We're newlyweds.
Oh, when do you stop being newlyweds?
When do we start?
That's another show. Okay, anyway, so we're going to go ahead and get started. The way that, as you can see, we like to have a lot of fun. If you don't have fun in life, you're doing it wrong, because there's enough mess and confusion in the world. We don't need to add to it. And we're going to discuss some of that. So the way that it works, we have 5 questions that we discuss. Those questions have been sent in by panelists, or they have been sent in by viewers. And so we are going to speak truth to those questions. And that's what we're going to do. Yeah. Again, we're going to be honest. As I've said before, you're going to hear the word white, black, Caucasian, African-American, Hispanic, Latinx, colored. Well, you probably won't hear colored, but you might. So prepare yourself for honesty. If you're not ready to have an honest discussion about race, this show's not going to be for you. But we plan to have an honest discussion, biblically, spiritually, and we want to, hopefully it motivates you to build a bridge with someone close to you as well. All right, so our very first question simply talks about, we're going to skip around a little bit. Our first question that we're going to go over kind of talks a little bit about Black History Month, because we're talking about education in the Black community, okay? So, during February, and most times in schools, those schools have what's called Black History Month. And during Black History Month, most places that I've visited, they teach you about 1 or 2 Black inventors or someone who was in the civil rights movement or whatever the case may be. And most people are really excited because, oh, it's Black History Month, yay! But here's the question. Why is Black History Month 1 month, 28 days? And why isn't there White History Month, right? If I'm Caucasian, maybe I want it to be White History Month, you know? Why are we doing something special for Black people? Yeah, right? So why isn't there a White History Month? Sheila, can you help us with that? Maybe you can give us some insight, information on it?
Well, and to be honest, I've never heard anybody even ask that question before. I think the idea of White History Month is kind of ridiculous because we teach white history all school year long. And we don't call it white history, call it American history. And I heard Morgan Freeman talking about this not too long ago, and it was long ago for him, but I saw an old recording. Just that, the idea of cramming anyone's history into 1 month is kind of ridiculous. You can't do it. There's too much material there, too much to cover. And, Black history just is part of American history. And, with that in mind, Black history should be woven in throughout the school year, not just, highlighted for 1 month. And on, as an educator, the school I've worked in, which to bear, were predominantly white schools. The one I'm in now is probably a pretty good mix with like a Hispanic population, Latino, but we don't put a big emphasis on it even in February. I feel like it's kind of gotten, I don't know, brushed over now a little bit on that regard. So we're falling a little short. When I was growing up, I remember learning about a few people throughout the school year. There was a big emphasis on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And, we learned about Rosa Parks and George Washington Carver and Harriet Tubman. But it was mostly, in regards to slavery and civil rights, and not much beyond that as far as, achievements and accomplishments in that community. And so I feel like we're falling short even now. I mean, we've made progress probably since the beginning, but it's nowhere near what it should be. And history is flawed. I mean, it's written by people, and people are flawed by nature. And there's always more than one side to a story, and we usually end up with just that one perspective. So we're missing a big piece of the picture in those situations. So, I mean, I feel like I get overwhelmed thinking about trying to incorporate it as a teacher because I don't have the knowledge base. And, I grew up in white schools. I work in white schools, or even, like now there's a lot of Latino people there, but not a whole lot of Black people, even on staff. I don't think we have one staff member.
Wow.
So, I mean, and it's, the community I live in, the area I live in is just mostly Latino and white. So, I mean, we need experts, I guess, to step in and kind of help with that, because we just don't know.
Yeah. That's a great point that, why is a lifetime, years of history crammed into 1 month? When we were teaching at church Black history during Black History Month, it was hard to choose. You can only highlight so many people. You can only tell so many stories. So that is a challenge to cram, one thing into, such a small amount of time. And I saw that little cutie bug behind you. Did you see her back there? Yeah. Okay. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say something. I'm just piggybacking off of what Sheila said and off of what you said, that there isn't a lot of time to discuss the history, not just for African Americans, but for everybody, all different types of cultures, really. My wife and I were just talking about that last night. But the question why do schools have Black History Month but don't have White History Month? What Sheila says is because American history is, predominantly, you will see that it's more, white history, because I want to say there seems to be a predominance, in what, how can I put this? Hey, people teach about what they want to teach about and what they think is important. We were talking about classical, what seems to be a standard. Yeah, we were talking about yesterday in our pre-call. We were talking about what standards are, and we look at history and what standards are in American history. And if you're looking at it, you have a sliver of Black history, and then everything else is American history, and the faces that you see there are predominantly white. That's what I remember. And I've been in different types of school settings, predominantly Black school, predominantly white school, just different, settings, depending on the leadership, depends on what they, talk about. But I just think it's interesting. There isn't enough time to talk about it, but Black history is extremely important, when it comes to like identity for a young Black man. I wouldn't have really known about, Black history and the value that it plays in my life if it wasn't really discussed. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen TV programs where no one on the TV program looked like us, and when you hear history that isn't about you, except that maybe you were in bondage or you were somehow subservient or whatever, what are the image can be portrayed, unless there is someone, a parent, a teacher, or someone who cares enough to change that narrative. And so the narrative definitely needs to be changed. Did anyone else want to add to that? Have anything else to add? All right. So we're going to go on to the next question. And the next question kind of connects. We're going to go on to something called the 1619 Project, because we're talking about the lack of Black history being taught in schools. We're talking about the lack of willingness to teach it for whatever the reason is. It could be not enough education, not enough foundation, whatever. But there is the question here that talks about the 1619 Project. And we want to talk about what is the 1619 Project? And is it something that should be taught in schools? Valerie, do you know what the 1619 Project is? Can you tell us a little bit about that? And if it should be taught in schools?
The 1619 Project.
Oh, you know what? That's my fault. Look at that. I am human as can be. Reverend Cheryl, this is you, ma'am. Valerie, I appreciate you. Thank you. She was going to come in and tell me something. I don't know what it was going to be, but it was going to be right. Okay, Reverend Cheryl, would you tell us about the 1619?
Okay, the 1905. Well, as a little bit of a bridge from what Sister Sheila was sharing about Black history, and in our preparatory talks on earlier, I mentioned that Black history wasn't a reality in terms of the full population until the 70s. Black history was important. Black colleges, Black churches, Black social organizations, and Black communities passed on their history, the African Americans are known to have a strong oral tradition. You come to our churches, and many of the songs we sing are orally taught and taught by rote. There are also, if you're going to a Methodist church or a Black Lutheran church or CME, AME churches and so forth, and other churches as well, there were people who studied music and went to school and so forth and so on. But all that to say, within our culture, we have been careful to teach our children our culture. And I noted yesterday that James Weldon Johnson penned a Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is known in the culture as the Black National Anthem. He penned that in 1901. And so we always had Black History Day, a Black History Week. When I was in school, there was no Black History taught in the schools, and there was no Black History Month celebrated. And so
no Black
when you start
history at
talking
all.
about the 16,
No Black history at all was
not
taught
taught in the school.
Wow.
No Black history was taught in the school. You were taught about slavery, and it's going to be interesting. There's a line here that I'm going to share that kind of gives a good thumbnail of how America, because there's history from the perspective of the colonizing group, and there's the history from the enslaved group, and there's a history from the indigenous group. Okay, and all of that makes U.S. history. All of that makes American history. And so the history that was taught for so long was the history from the perspective of the colonizing group, the Europeans who came to colonize these United States. They told the history of America from their perspective. And what the 1619 Project is, it's described as a long form journalism project, wherein in business and in medicine and academia, you might call it the white paper. But it was not just a white paper, it was a living, breathing, and dynamic thing that continued, because it started in August 20th of 2019, which would celebrate 400 years since 1619. Wow. And 1619 itself is the date that the first slaves, African slaves, set foot on the continent, although some might say it goes back as early as 1400s when you start talking about Canada and some other out islands. But what it does, the 1619 Project is a collection of essays and literary works observing the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. And the project is described, most school children, this is the first line I'm going to share. This was a article talking about curriculum, that particular curriculum. Said most school children can recite the founding date of the United States of America as July 4th, 1776. But a searing project from the New York Times Magazine changes that date to August 20th, 2016, the day that 20 to 30 enslaved Africans first arrived in Virginia. So that was the beginning of American history in there. That's what's being espoused. It says also, no aspect of the country that would be formed here has been untouched by the years of slavery that followed. Now, the founding author, the lead project author, is Dr. I'm going to butcher her first name, Nicole Hannah Jones.
Nicole, yeah.
You might be familiar with her name because she was just denied tenure at, I believe it was Yale. She was denied tenure last week because conservative professors were fighting her work. And so what the New York Times did is they started with the New York Times magazine, and they continued publishing articles upon article upon article. And if you go look this up on the internet, you can go to the Pulitzer's website. You can go, even Wikipedia is respectable in terms of what they have there. You can go several places and find the works listed that were a part of this project. And Dr. Hannah Jones writes that the prevailing narrative taught in schools is that Black Americans' history begins with enslavement. And they had contributed little to the founding of this nation. And I shared yesterday that because we didn't have Black history, Ebony did something wonderful in the 60s. They printed the Negro Digest, which was a more literary form, long form publication. They also went and sold door to door Black history encyclopedias. And that's where I learned about Benjamin Banneker. And that's where I learned about the Black doctor who invented the process by which you pull plasma from blood. And that same doctor, that's where I learned that same doctor died because the white hospital wouldn't allow him in to receive the transfusion that would have saved him that he invented. So that history has been there, but what the history, and I don't say this in a negative way when I say colonizing, the colonizing group, the colonizers who came to this country taught history from their perspective. And if you're going to enslave a people, and if you think that they're not more than 3/5 a man, if you can negotiate how much of a man, a human being they are, then you're not going to attribute to them any history. I learned about Benjamin Banneker, and I was shocked that when these states were formed, there was a Black guy running around. And not just one, but many freed Black men. So that's the beginning of the 1619 project and curriculum. And this was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for 2020. Dr. Hannah Jones received the Pulitzer Prize. There has been a lot of pushback, and as I was studying this earlier, overwhelmingly, we come to the conclusion that America has been wearing a set of rose-colored glasses or red, white, and blue glasses, wherein a certain truth has been told to us, and we believe that.
Right.
And when somebody tries to sharpen the lens, broaden the focus to see what really happened, there is pushback. So there's been pushback by many, President Trump, many in the Republican Party, conservative teachers, conservative professors. One of the reasons her bid for tenure was denied was because they didn't respect her scholarship. They thought that her scholarship was not on point because it was Black scholarship. And what the New York Times did, this long form journalism work, this body of work, which consists of many essays and poems and articles all put together, they were committed to making sure that the majority of that came from Black authors and Black scholars. And by its very nature, can a Black person be a scholar? You know, that we're going through that in some denominations. Can a Black person be a theologian? Why would you even ask that question? That question is asked because you lack respect for that person of that other race. And so the 1619 Project takes a look at American history dating back to when the first slaves set foot in what is now the state of Virginia. It is a curriculum. It is something we can't possibly explain during, you know, the 5 or 6 minutes or 10 minutes we have here by question, but I encourage you to go to the New York Times website, read the series of articles there, read the discussion on some pushback on what needs to be corrected, and if there needs to be some correction. Take a look at the Pulitzer site. The information was overwhelmingly researched out and cited, but it's falling victim to I can't even say it, politics. And there's being pushed back against even saying that something happened before, you know, that the lives of slaves weren't even worth looking at in terms of history. So this forces people to take a look at what really happened, when it happened, and they're not saying that the Black slaves were the founders of our nation. They're just saying the country started when the colonies came here, and one of the things colonists did was enslave people, both indigenous and African, but that we were part of the picture a lot earlier than our history books let on. And the more white America is challenged to broaden its lens as to what is our true history, the more the resistance there is to that. And so you'll see debates about this, but you know, truth will out. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Man, you know,
so that's, you know, that's just a blurb. It's just a blurb. I encourage you all, as I said, check out the Pulitzer site, check out the New York Times, check out the Project Yale, and other places.
You know, it's interesting because this kind of goes back to the question we just asked. You know, can you fit all of Black history into 1 month? Can you fit all of this information in 5 minutes, as you said on this show? The answer is no. We have talked about some very important topics. We've talked about Black History Month, White History Month. We've talked about the 1619 Project, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, on whether that should be the replacement for the history. We've already talked about there isn't a such thing as White History Month, because white history is what has been taught as a standard in schools everywhere. So should this replace that? Anybody want to add to that? Anyone? What does anyone think about? Should the 1619 Project replace what is currently being taught? Any comments on that?
Yeah, in my opinion, I don't think that it should replace, but I definitely think that it should be added, along with a whole slew of other things. It should be added. It should be added because it's important. You know, our history is your history, is everybody's history. And to act like it didn't exist is a disservice, not just to myself, but to everyone. So it should be added. But to replace, I don't think so, because there's a lot that we need to talk about. So that's my 2 cents.
And you know, I never knew there was a Black History Encyclopedia.
I did not know. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Wow. There's a Black History Encyclopedia? Where is it? you know, there's work for me to do after
There
this.
was. There was.
Yeah, there was. Okay.
I'm sure it may be out of print, but you could check with your libraries and check with Ebony, and they're selling them door to door. And just like your moms would buy pots and pans door to door, they in Black neighborhoods, and the Bible stories would be sold both door to door. There was a guy selling the Black history encyclopedias from Johnson Publications. I'm calling it Ebony, from Johnson Publications, the publishers of Ebony. But I agree with Brother Noel that I long for the day when U.S. history is a true reflection of the U.S. from its beginnings and all the people that contributed to the melting pot. We love the tag, it's a melting pot, but there's some folks there's some folks who never get to the top to see they never get to see the promised land. And so true American history involves African Americans, involves dealing with the enslavement, involves Asian Americans and Latinx and all the different races. All of us contribute to the history of this country. And so we've been looking at it through one lens, and that needs to change. When that changes, then we don't have to have Black History Month or Asian American or any other month.
Correct.
But until it changes, we do. And so our history needs to be broadened.
Absolutely. You know, can education help that? You know, there's two ways to look at it. Can education help in racism by either the person becoming educated or by, you know, the Black person becoming educated? Can that help end racism on their life? Or can education period end racism? Trisha, what do you think about that?
Well, for the first aspect, the way, and maybe I'm interpreting this the wrong way, so if that's the case, someone let me know. But the way it strikes me is it seems to be putting the onus on the Black person to get educated so that they will no longer face racism. And that doesn't quite make sense to me because, I mean, first of all, if you're really racist, I don't know that someone's level of education is going to change the way you view that person.
Exactly.
And if I say to a person of color, well, you have to achieve this standard that I want you to achieve in order for me to treat you like an equal, I'm still being racist towards them and even classist. So that just doesn't add up to me. If I'm racist towards another people group, it is up to me to do something about my racism and not expect the person I'm being racist towards to meet my standards for them. That's ridiculous. But I do think education can really play an important part in the conversation on racism, and especially in raising our kids to be anti-racist. So I have two thoughts, really. The first is, because we're talking about history, right? The more I know about history and all of history, not just white history from white perspective history, but like we were talking about, a broader perspective of history, the more I'm able to recognize when that history is repeating itself. And also I think I'm less likely to do or say something racist out of ignorance.
Right. Amen.
Granted, there are people who will do or say racist things and know exactly what it is that they're doing, and that's a whole other category and conversation, unfortunately. But I'm less likely to say something without meaning that, if I'm aware, and if I've been taught that. And I know I said this on the conference call last night, but I really equate it to the way that I was always taught growing up about the Holocaust. I heard from a lot of different people and places and sources as a kid growing up about the Holocaust and what it was, and the gravity of what happened and how terrible it was, and why it was so important that we continue to talk about it and teach about it constantly, so that we can make sure that it never happens again. Unless anyone listening to this conversation misunderstand me, I agree that is something that we should do. That's important. But what I've realized as an adult looking back is I didn't hear those same conversations or teachings around other events in history, like the enslavement of African Americans, or talking about the Jim Crow South, or specific like parts of the civil rights in the 60s. What I remember being taught about civil rights was we had segregation. Black people and white people were separate. It was illegal to mix. And then we tried to integrate folks, and some white folks were real unhappy about that. And then Rosa Parks didn't want to give up her seat on the bus, and Martin Luther King made this really amazing speech, and that's it. Just real, like short little bullet points, real surface level, that's it. And I didn't know anything about, like some of the protests and how badly the peaceful protesters were treated, and even the March from Selma and Bloody Sunday and what that was, and even just going back to slavery, like some of the conversations that we would have around the Holocaust, not having those same conversations around slavery. Like we would talk about it, but with the Holocaust, it was, okay, this is really terrible. And, this is like real somber, and we need to talk about this, make sure it doesn't happen. Slavery was never talked about in that context, even though we understood it was bad.
Right.
It was never, this is how bad it was, and this is what it, because it, like, that set off like everything else, right? We can trace back to slavery, and that was never made clear.
Yeah.
And adult me looks back on that and goes, well, that just doesn't make any sense. So if we think that it's important to talk about the Holocaust, and we can agree on why it shouldn't be that much of a leap to apply that same principle to Black history and things like slavery. But in the other side of that is we also need to talk about not just those terrible events. It's important to know about that, but we also need to talk about the achievements and the accomplishments of Black people, like we've already talked about, but that's important for white kids to know about too. It's important for white kids to hear Black voices and Black histories being lifted up too, because if in my opinion, if everything is centering around white voices and white history, and if in some cases, if you're in a school where everybody that works in that school is a white person, all of your teachers are white, and they're not hiring any people of color, and all of everything that's being taught is from a white perspective, then whether it's intentional or not, you're sending a message of white supremacy.
Yeah.
So it's important for white kids too to hear perspectives and histories and contributions and achievements of people who don't look like them, so that they know it's not just white people who do things or who do good things or who are the heroes. People who don't look like them can be the heroes or contribute things and do great things. It has to be all of it.
Agreed. It has to be all of it. Okay, because we're all important. I'm not more important than anyone else, and no one else is more important than me, but we are all important and should be included. So also we know that a lot of documentation was not kept when it came to Black people. Just like we talk about the race massacre there in Tulsa, there are people that grew up in Oklahoma that didn't know what that was. There are a lot of Black people that don't know Black history, and sometimes they are looked down upon because they don't know it. But if you go to school all day long and you never learn it, then someone has to be able to tell you, something different. You'll automatically assume, how many times have you heard, even though my sister Sheila said that the school that she's teaching at is predominantly Caucasian or white, you would have someone else say, are there any white people in Idaho? I mean, any Black people in Idaho? Of course there are. I mean,
Black people.
Yeah, Black people are everywhere. Okay, but if only one story is being told, then guess what? That's the one that you think or believe, Why was it such a leap when the Cosby Show came out to believe that there was a Black lawyer and a Black doctor? Oh my God, there's a Black doctor? There's a Black lawyer? And they're married to one another? You're joking. Yeah, but only one story has been told, in so many different ways. So I heard you say, Trisha, something about anti-racism. Sometimes we hear don't be a racist and all these different things. We're going to talk a little bit about what is anti-racism. So what is anti-racism? What is that? Is there a thing called anti-racism? I mean, I wonder who can tell me a little bit about that? Can you tell us a little bit about what anti-racism is?
Yeah, it's literally in the name. Okay, anti-racism. Okay, anti is to be opposed to, right? To be against. I am anti whatever. Right now, the subject matter, racism. Anti-racism, opposed to racism. And what if somebody says, well, I don't know, what racism is? Racism, to dig into that, there's aspects of racism. There's different types of racism. You have institutional racism, which occurs in an organization. You have interpersonal racism, which occurs between individuals. Like these are public expressions of racism, often involving slurs, biases, or hateful words or actions. You have structural racism, and it says this is like an overarching, it's an overarching system of racial biases across institutions and society. You know, there are different types of racism, but the idea of anti-racism is to be against these forms of racism. And how can we take anti-racism and make it a thing? You can make it a thing by bringing the mindset into these different areas, like in school. If you want to be anti-racist, you know, if you want to introduce anti-racism in school, think about how you are teaching a particular subject matter. You know, is your subject matter being taught from one particular lens? Or, you know, are you broadening that lens by not just making it seem like it's coming from one vantage point?
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
you want to be all inclusive. You don't want to be, you know, singular. So what is anti-racism? Anti-racism is literally being opposed to racism and putting action into the idea of not being racist. What can I do to not be racist? And unfortunately, you know, like I said earlier, there are many different types of racism. You know, some are unconscious. Unfortunately, I myself, and I, you know, how could I, you know, sit up here and say, you know, I'm a black man. I'll be like, the first thing when I think about racism, I'm like a white person doing something to me. Because, you know, you'll see anytime you talk about racism, oh, I'm not racist. You know, you don't hear about a black person being racist generally. But I will tell you on this Zoom call that I have been racist. And I'm not just talking about to white people, I'm talking about to my people.
Mhm.
You know, because of the way that I view my people, right? You know, but I have to be anti-racist and look at how I look at my people and anybody else. You know, I have to actively look at it and change the way I do things. So that's being anti-racist, being opposed to racism. And it can go deeper, but I'm not gonna talk all night on here.
That's such a great point, because people don't think of themselves as racist or being racist in any way. But instead of thinking that way, if you're anti-racist, you're against racism, period. It doesn't matter what your skin color is or where you were born or whatever, you're fervently working to make sure that you are opposed to racism of any kind. You're anti-racist. So, hey, don't be a racist. Hey, yeah, but be anti-racist. Yeah. So did anyone have anything they wanted to add to that?
I really like, Noelle, that you
I
use
just-
action. That's really what the way that I understand that is, like you said, a lot of people will say, well, I'm not racist. But anti-racism is taking it a step further, because you can be not racist, but you're also not necessarily doing anything to combat racism, whether that's more broadly in society or on a personal level. But anti-racism is actually taking it a step further and doing something about it. So that's it. So I just appreciated that.
Amen. There's a great book out about how to be anti-racist. Go ahead, Reverend Phil. I see you. Yeah,
I was just going to say a couple of things. One, a lot of times we be prejudiced, and prejudice, we prejudge a people or prejudge a situation. You know, we prejudge a school, White Sox fans and Cubs fans. We prejudge one another. And usually these two groups don't want to have anything to do with each other in Chicago. And they're prejudiced for their team over the other team. The difference between prejudice and racism, because you can do hateful and hurtful things. There were two women, one blonde, one brunette, slugging it out at Guaranteed Rate Field last week all over the news, because and they were slugging it out. And so you can do damage with prejudice. A team, or north side, south side, west side, whatever side of town you're on. But the difference with racism is that with racism, the race in power, all the different forms of racism that we'll describe, the race in power, the race holding the power can establish institutional racism. They can have structural racism. They can say Blacks or Latinos or Asians, Jews. Well, why do we have Jewish country clubs and white country clubs? Because there's structural racism built into that. Why did we have Black churches and white churches? Because at some point there was structural racism that said you won't be allowed. You can't go to this college. You can't do these things. So racism is a race, one race in power, inflicting harm upon other races. So while I can look at my own people harshly in some situation. Oh Lord, where all of us are. I'm praying, something happened on the news, and half the time you're praying, please don't let that be a Black person. Or if I was Latinx, please don't let that be a Latin person, or please don't let, whatever the case may be. But I can't harm an entire race, and racism can harm an entire race. And my only other note about anti-racism, and I agree with what Tricia was saying too, is that it is the action. I'm 65, and I'm going through a weird form of deja vu, because I lived through the 60s. Even though I was a little girl, I lived through it. I cried uncontrollably when Martin Luther King got killed. I cried uncontrollably when all these assassinations. I cried through the riots when they were burning stuff down around where we lived in West Harvey. And I heard the promises and the we shall overcome, and it was going to get better. It's going to get better. And it is now over 50 years later. And I see the same arguments coming up. And I see the same protests happening. And thank God I'm saved. Y'all don't understand. Thank God I'm saved.
Amen.
Thank God I'm saved. If it wasn't for Jesus.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what my forefathers and ancestors said. Thank God I'm saved.
Yeah.
But we have to get past what we did in civil rights.
Right.
We have to do something. We can't just say equal rights.
Right.
We have to be anti-racism. We have to be actively engaged. Don't just talk about it, be about it, as the kids say. We need to be everyone. White people need to be actively engaged in anti-racism. It needs to be accepted and understood. That's the only way we're, just like we wanted to eradicate polio. And the whole nation worked hard to eradicate polio. If we're going to eradicate racism, then everybody has to be engaged to do that. And until they are, that evil cycle is because at the heart of it is sin.
Right.
Yeah.
It's going to continue. And so we have to get beyond just saying slogans. We have in our homes and in our churches and in non people of color places. See, Black people can't make the United States not racist. White people all people have to be engaged in that.
Amen. That's true.
Sorry. So
No,
That's all right.
you're fine. What you're saying is true. Yeah. All people have to be involved. So when you say don't be racist, but be anti-racist, that takes that individual stigma off, because a lot of people say, oh, I'm not racist. They're immediately taken back. Me? Oh, no, I'm not racist. Okay. But are you anti-racism? Are you anti-racist? You know, are you doing something to make sure that racism isn't happening to someone else? When you see something, do you do something, or do you say, hey, that's not my problem? You know, what do you do?
Yeah,
right.
do something. You have to do something, you know, quickly. When I thought about the word racism, I started thinking about hate crimes. And I started equating racism to hate, and then I started thinking about anti-hate, and to be anti-hate is to love. I think love is the opposite of hate, you know. And so then God brought to me, do everything in love. The epitome of anti-racism is love.
Amen.
To love.
Amen.
Just love. Anti-racism is just love everybody in everything that you do. How can I love this person the best way possible?
It's good.
Well, and I think where education really comes in with that is, or in an environment where you're with people that are different than you are, you begin to appreciate them for who they are and not what they look like, or the stereotype you may have placed on a specific people type. But and this may be completely off topic, or it could be, I don't know, you interpret it how you will, but do you think these labels we put on ourselves make this worse? We're people, skin just happens to be the color we're in. Our cultures are different, but part of that is learning to embrace each other's differences and not be stuck and hung up on those things that are different.
I like that. I like that. You know, because
I also like.
let me say, you know, because, you know, when Sheila comes to town, when her family comes to town and we go out to lunch, you know, Sheila wants to go to have rice and beans and tortillas and stuff like that, you know, and I'm okay with that, but I prefer seafood, sushi, you know what I'm saying? And so Sheila and I have to come to an agreement. We have to see past any negatives, and we have to find common ground in whatever restaurant we're going to go have lunch. And then guess what? We can sit down and see past anything else and have a good time. So I totally agree with what you're saying, that we are all people. Unfortunately, everybody doesn't come from that sphere and or that lens. And our prayer is that people will take more time, like you said, with people that look different than they are, than themselves, so that they can learn more, and then they can say, hey, I have to have rice and beans. I have to have rice and beans. If you don't have rice and beans, you're wrong.
What's wrong with you?
So we have like I told you, we have a high Latino population at my school, and I had a couple of students give me stuff like just end of the year gifts, and I have a Mexican student that gave me Mexican candy, and she's like, enjoy a Mexican favorite. And that's what made me think of, because it's like, we just don't know where other people are coming from. We don't know their culture. We don't know their background. And so it's kind of neat that you can step out and say, this is who I am. This is where I'm coming from. And just a piece of it, you know?
Yes. Amen. Agreed. Agreed.
Amen.
Reverend Cheryl, real quick, you want
I guess I was just that the Bible says we're all made in the image of God.
Amen. That's right.
And so whatever we are, He made us. And the phrase I personally hope to stamp out, Cheryl's responsibility, is that we need to be colorblind. No, God made jonquils, and God made daisies, and he made roses, and he made tulips, and he made these colors for a reason. Yeah. And so we need to see, like Sheila was saying, we need to see and embrace each other for who we are.
That's right.
And stop. And the problem is, sometimes we want to say, all come together and sing Kumbaya. And we cannot sing Kumbaya if you're still doing things to hurt me.
Right.
There needs to be some accountability.
Exactly.
Some ownership.
Exactly.
Then we can move on. The labels we have been, the labels were never used by the individual. The label was used by the person putting somebody else down. So
true.
We're all made in the image of God, and we fail God when we treat somebody like that's not God's express image in front of me, no matter what their color or language.
Amen. So we're God's creation.
Or whether they know him or not.
That's the label. And then we can go from there to being his children. So we talked about we're all God's children. Okay. We're all God's creation. We're all created in his image. As you accept him into your life, then you become his child. But as we're ending up talking about education and the Black community, there is a question that talks about the school to prison pipeline. And some people are unsure, the school to prison pipeline, some people have never heard of that before. But again, we do have educators, spiritual educators, physical educators on our panel. And Miss Valerie, what is the school to prison pipeline? Can you help us with that? What is that?
Yes, I can definitely help you all understand this. Just a little bit more about my background real quick. I was raised in an environment where that wasn't really a thing. We lived up north up until I was 17. So I had no idea up until about a month and a half ago what the school to prison pipeline was. And I heard about it from my husband. So I did a little history. So it started back in 1987. And it was kind of spearheaded by the government. Budgets were kind of between 1987 and 2007, around about that time, or that time frame, the U.S. government actually enlisted budgets to states gave school districts. And the whole point of the school to prison pipeline was that they partnered with what they call SROs, or school resource officers, and the police department.
Yes.
To bring SROs or school, the officers into the schools. And the target population was African American students or disadvantaged students. Now, it's more common for African American students than it is for those who have disabilities. Okay. But this started back in 1987. And if you go back and just count how many African Americans are actually in jail, that's why there's so many more of our people in jail than there is whites, Hispanics. Because that's where it's spearheaded from, male and female alike. So it's not gender based, it's cultural based. Okay, so that's kind of how it's spearheaded. Now I know times are kind of shifting now just because of the All Lives, Black Lives Matter, and recent history has shown that many school districts are trying to shift away from the school to pipeline emphasis that happened from 1987 to 2008. So school districts are trying to opt out and not have school resource officers in their schools, but a lot of schools still do. Children now, if you live in a highly populated area and there's a high crime rate, you're going to have police officers in your school, and they're going to be targeting our students. And the goal is to get them out of the school and into the Department of Juvenile Justice, and then eventually into the prison system. But while they're still in high school, middle school, high school, not elementary, but middle school, high school, more high school age students. It's a very scary thought as a mother, just thinking about, is my child going to be targeted? Right. We're in the deep South, and racism very much exists in our community. It may be low key, but it very much exists. It's a scary thing. for example, if you have four students who are in a school and there's a case of drugs, they're going to target that African American student before they will the white student. Even though the white student may be the one actually doing the drugs. They're going to automatically search the child who's African American. Why? Because they assume that they're the ones who are, and that's not even the case. But that's just the assumption. But again, that goes back to systematic racism. It started back before 1987, but like I said, the U.S. government, and I know y'all said y'all don't want to get political, but you know, everything's all roundabout surface. It's all a circle. Ain't no squares, ain't no triangles. It's all a circle. It's all connected. Okay, so if you get deep, it goes back to that funding portion of it, because where's the money come from? Districts get their funding from the state. The state gets the funding from the federal. So the money came from somewhere to provide for these resources. So my hope and prayer is that eventually school districts will realize that they have control over the funds that they receive, and that they will shift those resources to actually help our kids who are less advantaged, who are struggling to get support, the proper support, not the support where they're getting pushed into the prison system or DJJ or getting put out or expelled or, that sort of thing. So like I said, it's a very fragile conversation because it's again, some things people just you don't talk about. You just kind of, you don't want to talk about it. But it needs to be talked about. Again, like I said, I became aware of it because my husband was talking about it. Roger's very political. And so he first introduced me to it. Like I said, I didn't know because again, where we grew up, that just wasn't a concern. But I was raised in a predominantly Caucasian environment. So, and it was up north. And things are different in the north than they are in the south. Okay, I would be interested to know, I'm actually gonna go do some more research to find out whether the school to prison pipeline is more for the southern states or the northern states. That's a good question. I don't know that answer yet. I'm gonna find out because I don't know. I know it's definitely the southern states, but I'm wondering, is it just the southern states or is it all across the United States, or is it, or is it predominantly where African American cultures reside more or less? Go ahead.
I apologize. I was jumping in with you. It might be that. It might be, geographical, or where there's a predominance in African Americans. Because obviously, this is my sister that has just answered this question. And we raised in the same.
She's my sister too.
Yeah, that's right. She our sisters, right? But we were raised in the same house. Obviously I'm older than her, and I went to I won't name the school, but we, in this particular school, it was a predominantly Black school. And one thing I remember in this school, excuse me with this pen, one thing I remember in this school is they had law enforcement officers, or they weren't, I don't know if they were law enforcement. I know that they had badge, and they had they used to walk up and down the cafeteria with the metal detector, just swipe it. And I went to a rough school. My middle school and the high school were rough schools. And I remember when fights went out, when there were fights, there was going to be blood, and cops were going to come to the school. I remember they had metal detectors at the actual front door as well. And so I remember seeing that type of stuff. And I wonder that if this, prison, school to prison pipeline, if that actually was there already. I just didn't know anything about it because, I didn't want to be in no fight, and I didn't have any weapons or anything like that. But I remember there was some rough characters in my school. And I remember sometimes you see them and then sometimes you just wouldn't. I was like, where are they? Because they're my age. They should be in school, unless they just ditched school today, or maybe they were somewhere else in some other type of system, because they got caught up. I don't know.
I kind of, and maybe I'm deviating a little bit, but I kind of feel like that gives the SROs a bad rep because I've worked with some of them and I've worked with some really great ones. Now, again, the schools I've gone to are predominantly white, but they were there. Their presence was there, and it was communicated to me from administration and other teachers and people around me that they were there to build a bridge and to make law enforcement a more positive influence in the kids' lives. Some of those communities were lower income. So even though they might have had white skin or brown skin, maybe they were still going to get into trouble, you know? But we've done foster care. So like I've had interactions with them, with kids of mine that have gotten into trouble at school at an elementary age and in middle school. And one of the boys even was being detained because he had drug paraphernalia in his locker. Like they'd done a random locker search and he had it on him. His mom had given it to him. And he was a white kid. But then, I mean, we've had Black kids that have completely lost, they like flipped their lid at school, and, you know, these guys get involved to kind of cool them down. And some of them are great men. So, I mean, I guess it depends on, you know, the environment. And you've got, I don't know, I hadn't heard of the school to prison pipeline until yesterday in those terms. Like I didn't realize that was even a thing, but some of those SROs are there, you know, to build a better relationship with the community and not there to necessarily bully and push the kids out of the school system, I guess.
You know, what I hear Valerie saying, and I hear you, Miss Sheila, what I hear Valerie saying too is that this was created through the government and then brought into the school system. So what I hear you saying, Miss Sheila, you're talking about it from the school, the school campus out. And I hear Valerie talking about it from the government into the school. So the thought for me would be, some of these people that they're hiring may be awesome people. They're fulfilling a job. But the question comes, you know, do I need law enforcement to help me communicate to a child in this society? Now, I know in today's, school system, that kids, they flip desks, they fight teachers, they do all kinds of things, however,
They bring guns.
and they do. But the question comes in, where is the breakdown that happened before any of these other things occurred? What happened? And because long since I've been going to school, kids have been, bringing weapons to school. Kids have been going through tough situations at home and all of that. But they would never flip a desk. Or I come from the time where people's mothers came to the school with curlers, and you can see somebody walking and say, "Ooh, somebody's mama's here. Ooh, I don't know
They
who
about to get it.
Somebody's mama." So I know that home environments have changed, but I also believe that when you go more to a hands-on approach versus, and I don't think our teachers are really responsible for this as much if they're not making the rules. In this research, I talked to a lady who we're good friends with, who goes to church, and she was talking to me about how students are targeted as early as elementary school. And she said that because she teaches at an at-risk school, and she was saying that they make sure that they're teaching these kids at their grade level to make sure that they're promoted, versus some schools are teaching these kids at a lower grade level where they're like, so for example, if they test at a third grade level, but they're supposed to be in fifth grade, they're teaching them at a third grade level. That means that the kid never gets out of that cycle. But if they're supposed to be in fifth grade, that they teach them at a fifth grade level, but then they add the support that student needs to eventually bring them up to where they're supposed to be. Because frustration, not just from home, but frustration from what's actually happening in the school can promote, a child to act up. you know, and us doing the children's ministry, you know, I know just if a child is acting up, you know, there's something going on. And again, I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm just saying there's a breakdown somewhere. So I don't want to take up all the time, but
Well, quickly, and then I think that.
go ahead.
Matter of fact, go ahead, please.
Go ahead. We have about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Reverend Cheryl.
I think you want to say.
I was going to say a couple of things. One, you know, we talked about, I'm going back to the 60s and 50s, where education was separate and not, they claimed it was separate but equal. But what we know in reality, it was separate and unequal.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've done now in an effort to push everyone to get the same education and all this, but we're dealing with some inequities. And when I'm thinking about this, failing public schools is a very big part of this, of what starts this pipeline, because of overcrowded classrooms, lack of qualified teachers, insufficient funding for extras. But unfortunately, extras are things like counselors and special ed education and textbooks. And even when mainstreaming students who normally would maybe be in special ed or behavioral classes, whatever that case may be, and they'd have specialists, and there'd be a psychologist and a social worker and the counselor and the parent teacher all working together. We don't have the money. And so these kids fall behind, and as they fall behind, they become marked as problem children. And the young girl, Michaela, who died 2 weeks ago, she was in foster care, and she called the police and she got killed.
Mm-hmm.
Or other folks where they call a response, and it's a poor response. Our response to some social, mental, and behavioral situations is all the same. A hammer. It's like sending a bull into a china shop. And whatever this young girl was doing when the police got there, she's the one who called for help. She was placed in foster care because her home setting wasn't right, you know, so she's been failed down the line and she ends up dead. And in the same way, you know, we may be calling it this school to prison pipeline, but even when we had separate and unequal systems, this stuff was going on. A man just got released in Mississippi. He's been in jail since the early 60s for stealing hedge clippers.
Mm-hmm.
And he was serving almost a life sentence for hedge clippers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he's not the only one that happened to. So this process of it's the replacement of slavery, especially down south.
That's exactly.
They would have these things.
That's exactly
because when you put them in jail, what did they do in jail? They farmed. They punched in the plate. They were cheap labor that we didn't have to pay much. We had a new slavery force
Mm-hmm.
in these jails, and they're doing the same thing now for profit. So while our failing school systems, and then we're pushing the teachers to perform, and they're so pushed to perform that the only way they can get the grades in their classroom that they need is to get these problem children out of their classroom. So they get shunted to the side as a problem, or they go to a behavioral, this and the other, blah, 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 so that class can achieve. But at the same time, we don't have the counselors, the staff to really address what this kid is going through. And maybe does he need to be in a residential program? And does he have mental, you know, are there mental health issues there? Are there mental health issues in his home? And this child is just suffering because and acting out because of what's going. Is he being abused? Is she being abused? So this pipeline, you know, we've gotten sophisticated with it and identified it, but we've always had it. That put poor Blacks in jail And then that was a quasi-slavery. And it happened a lot down in the South, but it happened equally in the North.
Yeah, because I went to school in the North. So I want to give you a quick chance to, before we end, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, it's the same thing like with the, the police force, you have some police officers that are straight up awesome people. We need our police officers and all that. I'm sure we need some of those individuals that are helping to be that support, within school. But then you have the people who are there who are not for trying to make this a better type of situation, who literally are, okay, I'm targeting that person and I want that person, to be in prison. I want to get them out. They're not thinking about how to really help. So I just wanted to say that. So I heard Sheila when she said that, I think it depends on that person as well. But in the overarching thing, let's be creative with how we're managing, our children, not just trying to, put them in jail or get them out.
Exactly. And when you bring law enforcement into it, that is what you're incorporating. If I am saying no to a teacher, I'm wrong, right? If I'm a student. But if I'm saying no to a law enforcement officer, now I'm stepping into a different realm. Okay, so now that's going to affect me differently than me just being in a school acting out, But listen, we're going to end. It's been an awesome time. We're going to go around 30 seconds, 15 to 30, to get final comments from our panel. And we're going to start with you, Miss Trisha. Give us 30 seconds, final comments, ma'am. Go ahead.
Gosh, I just really enjoyed and appreciated listening to everyone's perspectives. And I know I say this every time, but it's true. I just learned so much from these conversations. So thank you. And I would just encourage everyone else out there, once again, to keep leaning into these conversations, go have your own conversations and just keep learning, because there's just so much that we don't know. And that's why we need each other.
Amen. We do need each other. Miss Valerie, final comments, 15 to 30 seconds, ma'am.
So I echo what Trisha said. It's been very rewarding for me. But, like I said, I've always considered myself a change agent. And so my brain's just kind of turning about, okay, I'm ready for us to start making that change. I'm not just a talker, I'm a doer. And so you just kind of opened the door for us to have further, deeper conversations. I'm 36, and I have a lot of and so I'm just a little fired up now. I'm fired up about what God's going to do, not only in my future, but the future of my children and my students. So every day I look forward to impact my life, my kids. But I look for kids every day who are at risk. That's my life. Every day, who are underprivileged, every day, and that's why I do what I do. So. Yes, thank you.
Well, we're happy that you are here and you do what you do. Miss Sheila, 15 to 30 seconds, ma'am.
Yeah, I got nothing. I love seeing all your faces, and it was fun talking, but I don't know. Thanks for inviting me on.
All right. Babe.
Colossians 3:14 says, and over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. All right, so let's love one another. You ain't pick up anything from any of this. Hey, love one another. That's it.
Amen. And Jesus loved us so much that he gave his life so that the world can be saved. Everything that you experience in this world, guess what? There's a savior, there's a helper. And all you have to do is ask him to come into your life, say, Jesus, I submit to you, come into my life, show me how to live for you. And I promise that I will all the days of my life. Thank you so much for watching us. Lord, bless this broadcast and everyone in it. We love you guys and we appreciate you. Have a blessed day. All right. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you to our wonderful.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.